Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kiara Simmons-Wood, and I will be your host for today's session. For those joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome. And for those who've attended one of our webinars before, it is great to have you back. Today's session will be delivered by Chris Hall, Head of Marketing at Charity Digital. Chris is unfortunately out of office today and as such has pre-recorded the presentation. However, the Q&A session will be covered live by Laura Stanley, our content writer, meaning that you will not be missing out on any of the interactive features of our webinars. Our session today will cover everything you need to know about charities and the climate crisis. Among other things, Chris and Laura will cover definitions of climate change and the climate crisis, impacts of climate change in the UK and across the world, and why charities need to lead by example and how they can do this. Before we start, I just want to share a few house rules. This session will be recorded, meaning that the recordings of the session, slides, and other resources will be made available to you within a week's time, so do not worry if you've missed something. We always love when our webinar sessions are interactive, so please do feel free to add in any comments, share your experience, and top tips in the chat section, as we'd love to hear from all of you. Please ask lots of questions at any time during or after Chris's presentation by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and Laura will be able to address these at the end of the presentation. And finally, if you encounter any sound or image issues, please do let us know in the chat, and we'll do our very best to get back to normal as soon as we can. Without further ado, let me hand over to Chris.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another Charity Digital webinar. Thank you again, Kiara, for another very kind introduction. I'm Chris Hall, Head of Marketing here at Charity Digital, and it's great to be chatting to you all today. As Kiara mentioned, unfortunately, I am out of the office today, but want to be able to deliver this webinar to you so that this is actually pre-recorded in advance. So apologies that I'm not with you today, but I am here in spirit and will definitely bring the energy in the delivery. However, you will still have access to all the engaging features of the webinar. Still please introduce yourself in the chat. Use the chat to ask those, as the hive mind, everybody else that's joined those questions that make these webinars so great as well. And of course, my brilliant colleague Laura, who has been the architect of a lot of our climate content, will actually be joining at the end to answer all your questions. The Q&A will still be going ahead as usual. As always, I like to start these webinars with a little bit about me. So here's a little bit about me and why I'm doing this before we get into it, and why I've decided to pre-record it instead of have someone else. Well, I've been working in marketing for coming up to 11 years now. I started off in the pharmaceutical industry before moving to the States to work for various tech for good startups. I then landed back here in the UK and did a few years at Google working for their local guides team. I then managed to find my way to Charity Digital, where I've been here for just past 4 years. It was 4 years last week, and I look after our growth, events, comms, campaigns, and content teams. Great gig, a lot of challenges as they all do in the charity sector, but being able to provide the support of charities like yourselves, that go on to help the thousands of other service users out there is really, really rewarding. Outside of work, I am a father to a beautiful but teething 9.5-month-old that is nicking all my sleep at the minute. I'm a very proud Geordie and a huge climate enthusiast. I was lucky enough to actually travel to Antarctica on a climate change expedition back in 2016. I actually went as part of the 2041 Foundation's comms team that aimed to help the 150 explorers traveling with us to share their story in their various professions when they returned home. I was doubly lucky in the sense that I was able to talk about my experience at the United Nations as well in 2017. I was a panelist as part of their UNDP Climate Crisis Conference, which was really, really, really humbling, to be quite honest, and a fantastic experience. So this is climate change has been a passion of mine for a while. And if you don't believe this, there's a photo of me standing in Antarctica in my Newcastle top to prove it. That's why I'm here today anyways. So let's dive in, shall we? So let's talk climate change. Climate change is the most pressing matter of our time. The climate crisis poses an existential threat, one that governments and organisations have not done enough yet to mitigate. It is essential that we take effective and meaningful action in the coming years to prevent its potentially devastating impact. And as charities, we do believe that we should be the ones championing climate action. And you might ask why. Well, we think it's quite simple. People often look to us as charities for support, for guidance, for moral advice on top of much, much more. And like it or not, we have reached into a captive audience, and we often are the best positioned to effectively lead by example, showing others in the communities that we have reached into and around the world to engage in climate action and help protect our planet. And that's what we're here to discuss today, that relationship between climate change and the charity sector. And throughout the next 30 to 45 minutes, we'll be exploring, among many other things, what the definitions of climate change are, the impact climate change is having on our world at the minute, how we as charities can get involved in the fight, and the best resources for charity to help us do that. So without further ado, let's start with a brief definition of what climate change is. So what is climate change? Climate change refers to the long-term shifts in weather patterns and average temperatures. Since the mid-1800s, humans have played a large role in releasing greenhouse gases into the air, largely through using oil, gas, and coal for homes, factories, and transport, as well as through modern farming methods and cutting down forests, which causes temperatures to rise. Greenhouse gases, mostly carbon dioxide or CO2, trap the sun's heat and cause the planet's temperature to rise. Since the 19th century, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has increased by 50%, and the world is currently 1.2 degrees centigrade warmer than it was in the late 1800s. Climate change is not simply about warming temperatures. Our planet Earth is interconnected with interdependent and fragile ecosystems, which means that the smallest changes can have the largest of influences. A series of UN reports produced by some of the world's leading scientists agreed that limiting global temperature to a rise of no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade would help us all avoid the worst impacts of climate change. However, excuse me, based on current projections, taking stock of our emissions and the current action or inaction of people in governments across the world, the temperature of the climate will rise by around 3.2 degrees C by the end of the century. Quite a harrowing thought. So what's the impact of climate change? How are we going to feel it? As I just mentioned, the components of the Earth are interconnected by flows, also known as pathways or fluxes of energy and materials. Our climate system is extremely fragile, and thus even small temperature rises can have a serious effect on various parts of the Earth. Some of the results we're already feeling from climate change are, the shift to the hydrological cycle, melting sea ice and glaciers, rising sea levels, ocean acidification, global greening, and more extreme weather. We've had a lot of that even in the last couple of months and years. These factors have a deep and profound impact on life here on Earth, often with the more socially vulnerable paying the heaviest price. But it isn't just humans. Entire ecosystems of animals, plants, insects, and other wildlife face huge threats from climate change as well. Ranging from areas becoming totally uninhabitable, loss of plant species, extinction, and so on. And to put that into perspective for you all a little bit, scientists estimate that extinction is happening at 1,000 times the natural rate due to climate change. Pretty powerful stuff. And yeah, just to highlight some of the impacts caused by change in our to our current climate system is, as detailed by the Met Office or as listed here, risk to water supplies, conflict and climate migrants, localized flooding, extinction, damage to marine ecosystems, fisheries failing, loss of biodiversity, change in seasonality, droughts and wildfires, habitable region of pests expands, forest morality and increased risk of fires, damage to infrastructure, food insecurity, the list goes on and on and on. It's quite clear that we're already witnessing huge impacts from climate change, and we can cite specific examples to demonstrate real world effects. I've seen firsthand, ice masses and glaciers melting in Antarctica, and they are melting at a faster rate than any time in history. For example, particularly in Greenland, the Arctic and Antarctica. There is less snowpack in mountain ranges and polar areas as there once was, and there's more than 20 million people, and more than 20 million people have been forced from homes due to climate change, with that number likely to increase exponentially in the coming years as well. In addition, we've seen various tragedies as a direct consequence of climate change, including most recently the Australian wildfires, cyclones Idai and Kenneth, the East African drought, South Asian floods, and the dry corridor in Central America. It's quite clear that climate change is affecting people all around the world, in often devastating ways, and at risk of, sounding a bit like a broken record here, that devastation is only going to continue as temperatures continue to rise and we continue to be ignorant to climate change. So why do we as charities need to get involved? Well, as I've kind of just outlined there, there's a method to my madness. There's an overwhelming evidence that climate change is already causing a whole host of problems. And it's becoming increasingly obvious that the problems will only intensify unless meaningful action is taken. That's why charity professionals and the entire charity sector needs to get educated, get enthusiastic, and more importantly, get involved. Now, as charities, we need to make the right ethical choices, and acting on climate change is the right thing to do. Not just for the current generation, but for the many generations to come as well. The planet, as we've all heard so many times, is our collective responsibility. And as humans, we need to rise to the challenge and protect our Earth from damage. And it's our generation's turn to leave it in a better place than when we found it. It's particularly important that charities get involved because, like it or not, we are leaders. People look to us for support, guidance, and moral advice. We need to lead by example, showing others across the world how to take meaningful action on climate change and be a united front, as they say. So how can we help? How can we join the climate change fight? Well, committing to action on climate change is actually the easy part. Saying what you'll do is very, very simple, but actually taking meaningful action is far more challenging. As mentioned, charities should lead by example, but what does that actually mean? What steps should we actually be taking? Well, firstly, we can develop a sustainability strategy. Climate action requires planning. A sustainability strategy will help you research, prepare, and will help define the actions you need to make your charity sustainable. It will also give you clear objectives to work towards, as well as allowing you to set out the tactics you'll use to achieve them. It also shows staff, volunteers, partners, and the public that you are serious about committing to sustainability. You might want to commit to an ESG strategy. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. It's the term used to talk about the sustainability of commercial and non-profit organisations alike. And as the climate crisis rages and social change accelerates, ESG is fast becoming one of the most important indicators of organisational health. Think of creating your sustainability strategy or ESG strategy as setting your organisation up to be sustainable financially, culturally, and ethically as well. We could do a whole separate webinar on developing a sustainability or ESG strategy, which we might well do in the future. If you want to see it, let us know in the chat. But for now, we have some great articles that can actually help you get started, so you don't have to wait for that. We'll be popping them in the chat and, of course, sharing them with the resources and slides afterwards. Next thing on the list is to update your policies. So as charities, we should regularly review our policies to ensure they have the climate in mind. Consider your travel policy, for example. Are you offering eco-friendly travel options? Are there incentives for staff willing to ditch cars and cycle a bike to work scheme, for example? Are you offsetting emissions for international travel if you have that? Are you recompensing cycling at the same rate as car use? Run through the policy with a fine-tooth comb and ensure you're centering climate action and the changes that you wish to make. And you need to apply the same level of scrutiny to all processes. Finding the best ways to make your organisation climate friendly. Sorry, skip back there. Finding the best ways to make your organisation climate friendly. Charities do not often put climate change at the heart of decision making. It doesn't rank as highly on the list as a lot of other things, and understandable. But revisiting policies with green eyes will allow you to rewrite and reimagine the way your charity operates. It will make you a more effective workplace, committed to climate change. The next point follows directly on from relooking at your policies. You need to ensure that you have effective policies that scrutinise the climate actions, as we just started, but also you need to have the same that scrutinise the climate actions of the people you work with as well. It's a matter of transparency and accountability, essentially. Now, if you're committing your organisation to sustainability as you should, it follows that the suppliers you work with should be committed also. Looking at adding sustainability factors or considerations into your procurement processes. It's quite hard to say. Procurement processes, that's better. As charities, cost is always a factor, but this should not be at the detriment of working with a supplier who is going against your own climate commitments and beliefs and values. Likewise, the more we as a sector ask for this information from our partners, the more we encourage them to think about it in the future. So next step is to build climate awareness into your charity. While many charities want to do more to fight climate change, they aren't yet taking the steps to do so, as we said at the outset. Top tips to build awareness include ensuring staff think before they print. Shut computers down at the end of the day, switch off lights, unplug appliances, and that there are recycling bins around the office. You could then remind people of these actions and how important they are to your organisation with specially made screensavers on all your devices, or as a note in your email signature. It's all about every little helps until it eventually becomes second nature. Now, everyone should also be aware of your sustainability strategy that you've just set out based on our advice and understand their role in achieving the goals of that sustainability strategy as well. It's about getting the little things right, as I just said. Get them right first. It's like making your bed in the morning. If we all try to be that 1% better, those 1% start to add up over time, and we all start to make much bigger of an impact. Again, we could go into a whole separate webinar on building awareness in your charity, but we do have 3 or 4, 5 articles, I think, in total that can give you some ideas of how you can start to build these implementations in your organisation. We'll be sharing those again in the chat and in the resources that come with the slides afterwards. Next, a big part of it is starting to think about your digital footprint as well. The pandemic changed working conditions, but our move from the office to the kitchen, living room, bedroom, or wherever you are had actually surprisingly little impact on the environment. It's estimated that the IT sector is responsible for more than 2.8% of our global greenhouse gas emissions. There are numerous tools that can help charities calculate the eco-friendliness of their website and many ways to combat and reduce its impact on the environment. For example, by reducing the number of clicks it takes to reach your most important / popular content, this will reduce the number of pages that need to be loaded and energy used in turn. This will also provide a better user journey for your audience. Just need to make sure I get that in there. So it is a bit of a win-win, really. Alternatively, you can actually consider minimizing the use of non-system fonts. Non-system fonts require load time and consequently use more energies than system fonts as well. The same can be with images. Make sure you're using the right imagery that takes less load time. I think JPEGs are the best over PNG. But there's a great tool called the Sustainable Web Manifesto, which is a really great starting place for charities looking to reduce their digital footprint through their website. And yeah, just to put this into perspective for everybody, back in 2019, OVO Energy shared some research based on email usage. They actually named it Think Before You Thank. And this research cited that if every Brit sent one less thank you email a day, we would save 16,433 tonnes of carbon per year. That is the same as 81,152 flights to Madrid. Just let that sink in for a minute. Now, they stated that over 64 million unnecessary emails are sent in the UK every single day. And these include the really sort of one-liner emails like, thank you, thanks, have a good weekend, received, appreciated, you too, lol, and loads more added to that list as well. And that adds credence and proof to the 1% I was talking about before. So stopping the little things and working on the little things really does make huge impact. So get your teams thinking before they thank straight away. Now, OVO also have the OVO Carbon Cap out, which is a Chrome plugin that helps you keep mindful of your carbon output when you're online as well. So that's something you can get all of your teams to employ and keep them conscious and mindful about their digital footprint. Sticking on the digital footprint theme, another tactic to employ while considering your digital footprint is reducing your e-waste. So e-waste is short for electronic waste. It's made up of discarded electronic devices that are no longer useful or functional. These can include televisions and other domestic appliances, but charities are more likely to generate e-waste in the form of old smartphones, laptops, and desktop computers. It's almost impossible to avoid producing e-waste, but these electronic devices often contain hazardous material like lead, mercury, and cadmium, and they can be extremely harmful to the environment and hazardous to the health of humans and wildlife if not disposed of properly as well. Now, the first thing to consider is whether the electronic goods your charity no longer wants could actually be put to use by someone else. This is important if your electronic goods can be sold or given to someone else to use instead of becoming e-waste, then all the pollution risks are avoided in one fell swoop. What's more, when a phone or computer is handed to someone else to use, it means that fewer new ones have to be manufactured as well, with a resultant reduction in the amount of carbon dioxide emissions produced. Another win-win. The good news here is that it's not actually hard to get rid of old electronics or recycle them. And that's because there's a significant number of charities and other organizations which will take computers and other electronic goods and find a new home for them. What's more, many of these will collect from will come to your charity's premise and collect from there. And these include a list I've put together for you here. We Charity collects electronic goods and resells or recycles them. The Reuse Network collects unwanted goods, including IT equipment, and resells it at a low cost through a network of charity shops. Good Things Foundation's National Device Bank refurbishes equipment and provides it free to community organisations. Computers for Charities offers low-cost pre-owned computer equipment, including software. And there's a different computers for charities, donates unwanted laptops, computers, and other IT equipment to charities similar but different there. The Renewed Store supplies refurbished computer hardware to the charity sector. Computer Aid supplies very low-cost refurbished IT for non-profits. And Green Root Tech offers free refurbished computers, IT hardware, and software services for UK charities. So as I said, you're not spoiled for choice there. So there's a lot of things on offer for all your IT equipment that just might be lying around your office or you have to send to the landfill. And for those of us still with offices and working in offices, another way to fight climate change is to make your office green. Start by pick and paper products certified by the Forest Stewardship Council, the FSC. The logo means that products have gone through proper diligence and sourcing. Similar agencies that confirm sustainability criteria are the Rainforest Alliance and the United Nations-led REDD Plus program. Using these types of products give you the comfort of knowing that you aren't using controversial raw materials that contribute to the climate crisis. Then consider switching your energy providers to ensure you're using renewable resources. If you're looking to make a change, check out Octopus and Green Energy. Octopus offers electricity from 100% renewable sources, while Green Energy supplies both green gas and electricity. You might want to pop some plants in the office too. Plants and greenery in the office go a long way. WeWork, an office space provider, says plants not only clean the air, but help relieve stress and boost productivity as well. So pop down to your local garden centre to share it with your staff, or do it as a next team away day or next volunteering day, and engage in a bit of climate action in person. So after you've done your garden centre trip, you can then get your team to focus on the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Every product we use affects the environment to some extent. So recycling what we can, reducing what we use, and reusing the items can have a big impact on ensuring that items do not end up in the landfill, a lot like e-waste we talked about previously. Encouraging recycling in your organisation by ensuring there are recycling bins around the office, clearly marked for paper, plastic, and glass. Ask staff to use glasses for water, reusable water bottles to reduce single-use plastic, and remind staff to consider the environment before pressing print, and consider donating the office furniture as well as your tech that you no longer need to organisations who need them as well. Another thing you can do is involve your trustees. Trustees are ultimately responsible for the charity they serve. If charities want to move the dial, if we want to move the dial on how we can address climate change, we must educate and involve trustees in the process as well. Or there may be financial decisions needed to be understood or even approved, such as moving to a more ethical and sustainable supplier. That may be more expensive, or changing the sort of workplace pension scheme to one with ethical investments, for example. It's important that trustees are included in the creation and sort of delivery of your sustainability strategy. Have some influence on its direction that ultimately, helps helps them buy into your desired approach and outcomes as well. So keep them in the loop and get feedback. Also, make sure you avoid greenwashing. So greenwashing is when an organization makes green claims about their brand or product that are not entirely true or could seem contradictory. Charities need to ensure they are being transparent about their climate action, about the successes and about their failures as well. We should celebrate success, but we should also celebrate failures. It's how we learn. Charities should also ensure transparency around your products and your supply chain. Considering creating an ethical buying policy like Amnesty International UK have, which sets out a code of conduct to which suppliers must conform. It gives the buyer confidence that the charity is committed to only working with ethical suppliers. It's just a good feather in the cap. Going green should be like, going green and fighting climate change. It should be like everything else you're trying to do. It should be like defining your organizational values and treated with the same amount of merit. Values are only useful if they are supported and embraced by the whole organization. They need to be inward facing and measurable. Values that we see that are created to make the organization look better externally and better for the brand rarely achieve the desired effect internally. And commitment to climate should be no different in that regard. So wear it as a badge of honor internally, live by it, and track it as well. Next up, we spoke about commitment a little bit there. So yeah, speaking of that, ACEVO, the membership body for charity leaders, has put together a great framework for charities to help them structure and direct their thinking on climate issues and how they can be a part of the solution as well. Us as charities can pledge our commitment and join a community where we can share learnings and work together towards a shared vision. Ensure your charity is signed up and pledge their commitment straight after this webinar. And one of the best things about the charity sector for me personally, and I think we share this a lot in our community, is the willingness to share learning. Creating strategies and policies can be time and resource intensive, so large charities can help smaller ones by sharing theirs. If there's anything confidential as well, it can easily be redacted. Voluntary Action Harrow Co-op has a sample environmental policy for charities that they can use on their website that any charity can access it and adapt it to fit their own organizational needs. And, any charity can look to any other charity as well to take inspiration and educate ourselves, and just get involved with the cause. There's a lot of climate change charities out there that are responsible for lobbying people in power, educating people across the world, supporting victims of climate change, engaging in conservation efforts, and a lot more besides that. They're the ones leading the way, taking meaningful action and setting examples that we should all follow. There's a whole host of charities dedicated to the environment. I've highlighted 3 on here, but there's a lot more to it than that. We obviously have Cool Earth, who exists to give cash direct to rainforest communities to fund projects that create choice, tackle the root cause of deforestation, and protect vital carbon sinks as well. We have the Clean Air Task Force, push the technology and policy changes needed to achieve a zero-emission, high-energy planet at an affordable cost. And we have an amazing small charity that we met at our conference last week called the Ecological Continuity Trust, who support long-term environmental experiments, including the Buxton Climate Change Field Experiment, which is the longest-running climate change manipulation experiment in the UK. As I said, there's a host of others like Union of Concerned Scientists, Carbon 180, Greenpeace, Earth Justice, Rainforest Alliance, Climate Foundation, Climate Emergency Fund, Friends of the Earth, Environmental Defence Fund, and much more. And we'll be sending out the full list we've pulled together with the slides and resources. You can visit the websites of these in your own time to see how you can best support them, volunteer, or find ways to collaborate them and drive climate action forward. Similarly, one of the most important aspects of climate action for charities is staying up to speed with the latest information, ensuring your teams and organisations are educated, offering training where appropriate, and fighting misinformation. The educational aspect is becoming increasingly important in our present age, and there are plenty of resources available online to help charities ensure they stay up to date and informed. And we've compiled a list of great resources that you can use to learn more about climate change, ensure compliance, and gain the best information to take meaningful climate action. Again, we've listed 3 here, but there's a whole host that we'll be sharing after. We've got the UK Climate Risk. It's a website hosts the outputs for the Climate Change Risk Assessment Evidence Report, from research projects through to the summaries of the latest advice. Got the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which provides the most detailed and comprehensive summaries of the latest research on climate science and the impact of climate change. The UK Royal Society and the US National Academy of Sciences are fellowships of the world's most eminent scientists. So together they publish a joint statement on climate change science, which is always a good read. The UN Environmental Programme's climate change webpage also offers a range of information on the intersection of environmental issues, biosafety, gender conflict, and disaster, sports, and much more other things as well. Climate Change Resources offers lists of, among other things, books, podcasts, films, activities for parents, information on food waste, electric vehicles, new tech, and a lot more besides that as well. So it's a really good hub. We have the Organisation of Economic Cooperation and Development, which provides the most comprehensive summaries of the latest research on climate science and impacts of climate change. The Geological Society, who's published an important document which sets out the evidence for and risks of climate change from a geological perspective, so a bit more into the science. And the Met Office produces the UK climate projections. These are the most up-to-date assessment of how the climate of the UK may change over the 21st century. And it's someone who we cited already throughout their webinars. It's someone we use quite a lot. And of course, we at Charity Digital also have our own Ultimate Climate Resource Bank for charities on our Climate Change Hub, which you can find via the homepage of our website, and we'll also be sending it out later. So looking a little bit ahead, we as Charity Digital, we're going to continue to publish information on sustainability and climate action, hoping to do our part in protecting the planet. And we hope that you'll join us. Please get in contact or comment below, or comment in the chat or comment on the webinar page itself with any ideas you'd like us to cover or any thoughts or feelings of your own. Join the conversation with us, get on board, and we can start to fight this thing together. As I've kind of left a quote on the slide, the best way to engage in meaningful action is to cooperate, communicate, working together to ensure that we take proper care of our planet. So I hope you join us. And that's all I've got time for today. Again, sorry I couldn't be there with you in person. But if you want to connect with me or with the content team here about climate change, please feel free to do so through any of the information you see on screen. Huge thank you for taking the time to join us again today. I'm going to pass it over to one of our content creators here at Charity Digital, Laura Stanley, who will answer your questions. Take care, and I'll see you next time.
Well, thank you, Chris, for this very insightful presentation, and welcome, Laura. So we've had quite a lot of questions already asked in the Q&A box, so I'll dive right in. So the first question is by Lisa Brown, asking, how can we measure sustainability and impact when there's no office and people are working from home?
That's a really good question. I think it's quite hard to do that, but I think there are ways. So there are lots of online calculators that you can share that are free, and some of that are quite easy to use because I think they can look quite daunting as well, that you can share with your teams from home. Also, I know of a few charities that are doing emission surveys, so they're asking their staff directly about what transport they use and how, and all that sort of the elements of their emissions there. And I also think that Marie Curie have done, their sustainability manager shared a really easy formula for their staff to use to calculate their own emissions. And then other than that, I think it's just about the education piece and just making sure that, as Chris said in his presentation, that they're having those little screensavers of just encouraging people to boil boil only as much water as they need. Like even if you started I think again this is a Marie Curie example, set up an internal group called Going Green or something like that, and just keep it in the forefront of people's minds. I think that's a really good way of sort of keeping an eye on emissions, but also not, even if you can't do it directly for a start.
Thank you. And can I also just point out that Sarah has posted in the chat as well to answer this question, Lisa. So moving on to the next question, we got an anonymous question saying, does a thank you via Teams have a greater or lesser digital footprint than email?
So I don't know the exact carbon footprints of each thing, but I would like to just add that we also know that thank yous are really important, especially in the charity sector. Like, we know that the big thank you emails you do after donations help you get more donations, and that's really important. And we also know internally, like, everyone likes to be thanked, right? So we're not saying don't thank people, it's just finding out where you can cut down. So if it's, you said thank you about a million, you know, so just, you know, it could be a case of deleting old spam emails. That reduces the impact of the cloud as well. So people have all these old emails that we could easily delete that we won't need again, like those thank you emails. If you're going to send one, at least delete it. And then there are also loads of research into that you can find online on our resource bank as well, into what emissions go from each different digital element. So, for example, I found out that Teams and Slack they're both use green energy providers, but I don't believe that Skype does. So yeah, just do your research when you're using those digital tools. And I think that we'll try and add that into our content calendar, because I think it's a really worthwhile piece. And it's why we're doing the climate action campaign, because digital is both the problem and the solution, right? So we want to do that.
Thank you. And I'd really love to read that once you've written it. So moving on to the next question, John asked, how can charities get an accurate account of their carbon footprint, and what is the best way to present that?
That's a really good question. So I think the best place to start is with those carbon calculators. There are so many available online. So, the WWF has a really great app that people can use, and we'll share all of this in the resources afterwards. And yeah, and I think when you present them, I think it depends who you're presenting it to. If you're I think having a really clear visualization of that data, it's going to contextualize it for people and make them realize quite how much impact little actions have. Again, seeing that the stat about the emails has really blown my mind, because I think being able to see that it's worth how many flights to Madrid, that's insane. You know, we all talk about how the aviation industry is bad for the environment, but being able to actually visualize what an email has, I think is really helpful. So yeah, I would definitely talk about how to create a narrative around it, and present it in a visually appealing way, especially because this stuff does feel overwhelming. So yeah, just make sure that it's as easy to understand as possible. Yeah, you can use Canva's really helpful. So we've got lots of design tools. So like there's Canva, there's Adobe Express, and they will have specially made graphs that will be really easy. Just type in the data that you need to present and it'll be on there, and then it'll make it look more beautiful. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you. That sounds great. So the next question is, how do you make people care internally about climate change?
So yeah, going back to what I said a minute ago, really, is contextualize everything. So I think sometimes climate change can feel like it's really far away and it's not happening over here, but actually we've done a climate change in the charity sector survey, and one of the things that came out of that was that 71% of charities say that their operations has been or will be affected by climate change in the future, which is obviously such a huge stat. So I think contextualize it in ways that it seems super relevant. Start local and then go global, I think. And then also point out that things are like go hand in hand together. So saving energy is also about, in this cost of living sort of climate, it's about saving money as well. So a lot of this stuff does really go hand in hand with each other. Sustainability is, I feel like it's a bit of a catch-all term, and there's environmental sustainability and financial sustainability, but they all go together. And also I think this is a really important thing, that not everything has to be done at once. So things you are going to have, like the charity sector is notoriously time poor, right? We have so many different competing priorities that I just think it's really important to say that you can do small things, and it's worth identifying what the small things are and what the big things are, and then just working out where you can have immediate effect. And every single sustainability policy that I've looked at has been about how they're going to reach a goal in the future, not that they've already reached it. And it's good to communicate that as well, because people will value the fact that you're doing the work as much as they would when you've done it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that's great. Thank you. The next question from Martin is, what are people's views on carbon offsetting? Is it a bit of greenwashing as it doesn't change behaviours, or does it generally save and develop habitats?
I personally would say that I think carbon offsetting is not a bad thing in itself. I think planting more trees is always going to be really valuable, but I would be cautious about using it as a get out of jail free card, because it's not. You'd have to plant. So I think there are, we've definitely mentioned this in one of our articles, but you'd have to plant so much hectares or acres of woodland to actually offset the amount of carbon we're using. It's not the solution to the problem, but it's not to say it's a bad thing either, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So the next question is stating that Bangladesh is in South Asia. Are the citizens at the risk of climate migration? If so, when could it start?
I would say it's already started. So I think 7.1 million people were affected by climate change or climate change related weather incidents last year. And that number, I believe, is expected to rise to 13 million by 2050. The IPCC, which Chris mentioned, the panel for climate change, they said that more than 40% of people are vulnerable. More than 40% of the human population in the world is vulnerable to climate change, and we've seen that disproportionately climate change will affect the poorest countries and the people who have caused the least damage, for example. Mm-hmm. So I think there's plenty of stuff that charities can do here. It's given me a great opportunity to talk about mapping, which I think there's loads of data sets that are monitoring where charities are, where people might be being displaced. Mm-hmm. So we have an article about displacement on our Climate Action Hub, which I would really recommend to people, but it has a list of all the data sets. There's one in Manchester, which is monitoring how in the UK climate change is affecting different regions, which I think is really helpful. But there's also apps, like I think it's an app, it's a tool called Geodash, which has helped people it helps governments plan for different disasters. And so they're trying to map sort of remote parts of the world so that when they can respond quickly, because if it's not on a map, it's very difficult, right? But this is a really good opportunity for corporate partnerships, I think. So I'm pretty sure there's a bank that worked with the British Red Cross, and it was something that their employees could do remotely. If they had a spare hour, they could just sit and do some mapping. I think it's a really good way for people to donate their digital skills to you in a way that will have impact and will help with climate change response in the future. So I would definitely explore the mapping element of things and work out where people will be displaced and how we can help them in the future. We will definitely put that displacement article in the resources after this.
Yeah, thank you. I believe Josie has already actually put it in the chat. If everyone wants
brilliant.
That. And on that, we also have a podcast coming out on Tuesday, which we talk a lot about climate change and linking this to social inequality. If everyone wants to keep an eye out on our website on Tuesday. The next question is anonymous and says, what are the benefits of ESG for charities?
This is a really great question. I think they're numerous. Going back to that 71% stat, 71% of charities their operations have been or will be affected by climate change in the future. Operationally speaking, it's something we have to do. we have to think about it for our own sustainability, and also in the fact that our mission, it aligns with all of our purposes, because every charity is there to exist for the public benefit, right? So we have a moral voice on this. We're a good group of campaigners. It's very important for charities to do that. In terms of benefits for funding, I think donors and funding groups are becoming a lot more ecological savvy, and it's becoming a bit more of a risk to them as well. So I think it's really important that we recognise that will likely be a risk in the future, that if we don't have the information they want or we're not behaving responsibly environmentally, it will become something that will affect our reputation. It is a big reputational risk. So I can think of countless examples where it's already come up, but I guess the big one is the Royal Shakespeare Company and their partnership with BP, and the British Museum as well. So the British Museum have announced, I think at the end of last year, that they wanted to become a net zero museum, but they still have a partnership with BP, and they're becoming, they had, in the same week they announced that, I believe they had a protest from environmental activists, people who know that these don't align with what their purpose is. So I think it's people, you will get a backlash about it, basically. So I think it's a really big benefit there. It will help boost people's opinions of you. It will future-proof your operations. And also it's the right thing to do, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Also, it's part of being a responsible organisation, because sustainability and environment are all in the charity governance code. So it's something like a lot of it is stuff we're already doing and already reporting on. So it's just about formalising that into a strategy and making it ultra transparent for our donors.
Great, thank you. And Sabina is asking if you can give any advice or information about the carbon footprint of social media, or tips for how to be greener with use of social media.
Off the top of my head, I don't have any information I can think of. Videos are definitely higher, they definitely consume a lot more, which is obviously worrying because everyone needs a video strategy these days. But I can definitely look into that for you and find out which have the higher carbon footprints, and we'll find out. Yeah, we'll include that in our I think it's part of making our what Chris was saying in his presentation about making our websites and making everything more sustainable. We can definitely look into that.
Great, thank you. And Sarah has also put something in the chat relating to Sabina's question, so we could also check that out.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
So the next question is from Joe, asking, where is the best place to get accurate factual climate change and eco info to be able to communicate to our audiences confidently?
This is a really great question, and something that we've been definitely looking at when compiling our Climate Action Hub. So I would start with the UN is really good. Its Sustainable Development Goals are really helpful, but also they have very up-to-date information, and because I think they work in conjunction with the IPCC. I think the IPCC is part of them, so I think it's really good to they will have they often release new statements. NASA's quite good because they're still monitoring this stuff. The universities are all, I would look out for research from a lot of the universities. I think they're quite trustworthy and are also doing all the research. Let me think. There's loads more really great places that you can find. Environmental Charities, WWF is brilliant. They have so much information. They have stuff about top tips on immediate actions that you can take. They have a really great, they have the carbon calculator app that I mentioned. I think WWF are a really great place to start. For less globally there's also a climate outreach charity, which is brilliant. They have done a survey, which I found fascinating, because it discovered that as much as we're terrified of climate deniers, it's that broadly everyone is, across all demographics, is worried about climate change, and in the UK, and I just thought that was fascinating. But they have done research into attitudes towards climate change. They have resources that can help teach people about climate change, and also the Framing Climate Justice Project has a really great resource about talking to people about climate change. So it's how to, again, what I was saying earlier, how to contextualize it, the right metaphors to use, the ones that hit home, and also how to respond to maybe the arguments that come up more often, that you need to respond to, basically. I think that's invaluable. So we'll link to all of this.
Great, thank you. And Danai from the Ecological Community Trust has also said that their website features results from experiments. So that may also be one for us to check out. Thank you. The next question from Christine is, as a CVS, I am interested to know how we can encourage small, often cash-strapped organisations to consider the environment and sustainability.
Yeah, so this goes back to what I was saying. It's just making sure they realise that it's a part of being a responsible organisation, that it's not an add-on, it's part of what we're already doing. So it's part of what we're already doing, basically, and that it's about not cutting corners, really. And although things will be a bigger priority, and it's not, we understand that, but you can do little things now. That there's little achievements that can be made now that won't affect the prioritization in the future, but that will have an impact, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that is great. Thank you. So we received another anonymous question saying, we have an issue in our office where people continuously put the wrong things into the recycling, which our office manager spends her time fishing out. And if anything is missed, the whole recycling bag, of course, can't be recycled. Our office manager has put up signs, sent emails, and verbally tells people in the office all the time. She's close to stopping having a recycling bin because of the hassle. I hate the idea of not being able to recycle at work. Is there anything you can suggest?
Peer-to-peer accountability is a really great thing. Like, it shouldn't be only your office manager's job, and I think that can be really difficult. Obviously, like, no one wants to tell anyone off for that, but like, just also it needs to be, perhaps it would be helpful if it came from above. Like, these things can't be just this is what someone has said. It shouldn't be led as much. I know it's a frontline issue, but like, it should, if it can be led from above and communicated that this is actually really important, that helps people get behind it, I believe. I think that's a really difficult thing to be doing, but I think it's just, I really do think the constant communication of it. It sounds like your office manager has done everything right, putting up the signs, and but yeah, I don't like the idea of just one person fishing out that stuff. It feels really, it feels sad. I want so I just think everyone to offer support. Maybe it is about starting up that internal Going Green group, so you can have multiple people behind it and reinforcing it. But if you can talk to your leadership and get leadership to communicate that people need to be, this is really important. It's not just a throw your things in the bin thing. I think it needs to come from the top.
Yeah, and definitely just communicating the impact that it'll have. For instance, with what you were saying earlier about the emails, like, that's something that I, for instance, had never thought of beforehand, of how much just one thank you email could really impact the climate. So I guess just really, driving home the impact that one yogurt pot will have, for instance.
Yes, exactly. I mean, when you see the landfill stuff, you would never do it again.
Yeah. Thank you. So another anonymous question saying, it would be interesting to know which of FSC and fully recycled paper is the least harmful to the environment, as I read somewhere that sometimes the recycling process can be a lot more energy intensive, but I could be out of date.
I don't personally know a lot about that, but it's definitely something we can look into. And again, this is something we can do for our looking into the carbon footprint of individual things, because I think it's if we're all calculating it, it's good that this is why webinars like this, I hope, are helpful, because we want to collaborate and share our insights. And so I think if we can, I think that's a really good question. We'll look into it. Yeah,
I think we definitely have great recommendations for lots of new content to be put out on our climate.
Yeah, definitely.
So we have time for just a few more questions, which are still coming in, Laura. Another anonymous question says, are there any charity or third sector coalitions where we can put our collective voices together and pressure big businesses and the government?
That's a great question. So I'm not sure about coalitions, but I know that there are lots of forums and that charities are coming together with, and I think they are all on our resource bank. So I would recommend getting in touch with those. And there are digital tools that you can use to connect with MPs who are interested in specific areas that you want to lobby for, and so I would recommend looking into those. I will find the link to a few and see if we can put them in. We also will have articles. Activism is our climate action theme for April, so we will have a lot more articles coming out about that as well, about how to lobby and what sort of political activity charities are allowed to get involved in.
Yeah, thank you. And with regards to the last question that we had talked about of reducing waste within the office, Lisa just commented in the chat that she went to a Greenpeace session who said that our huge focus should be on reducing rather than the other two R's of recycle and reuse, because if we don't reduce, we'll never achieve the scale of being able to reuse and recycle. So that's also a lot of food for thought.
Yeah, I absolutely defer to Greenpeace on that. The one thing I would just add is that something that came up in one of our podcasts, How to Reduce Your Environmental Policy, was that I think it was Keep Britain Tidy. They had done a Buy Nothing month, Buy Nothing New month. So that was in the interest of reducing as well. And I think that's so internal sort of schemes like that, like, you know, your meat-free Mondays, but generally I think the Buy Nothing New one was really interesting to me. It's a bit of a challenge seeing how people can use different things, and hopefully everyone can get behind that sort of thing. So yeah, I'd really look into that. They have a lot of resources on their website if you wanted to host your own Buy Nothing month. So look at Keep Britain Tidy.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. Thank you, Laura. So we have another question, another anonymous question, saying that clearing out and archiving emails periodically, presumably this would be valuable too.
Yeah, definitely. There's evidence to suggest that the amount of emails on the cloud is just as bad as sending one, basically. So yeah, I think the amount of data we can reduce, the better, because data it's all hosted on these big servers, and that the cloud it can be really good for the environment. It can be better than the environment than printing lots of paper and all that sort of things, but it's also just balancing it. Yeah, so where you can reduce, yeah, definitely deleting emails is very helpful if you're able to.
Great, thank you. And we just have a little bit of feedback as well in the Q&A box from Lisa, saying that almost all of the calculators for that we were referring to earlier are based around office and travel, and not organisations that are all working from home. So I think that this is something that we're going to have to look into.
Yes, definitely, we will look into that. We'll write an article on it, but I would yeah, we'll definitely find out that information for you, because I think that's really helpful, and I think with the hybrid world we're all in now, so it'd be really valuable.
Yeah, there's definitely information that we should look up and find out more about. And yeah, those are all of the questions. So thank you so much, Laura. I think that's all that we'll have time for today. And thank you all so much for being part of today's session on the climate crisis. We do hope you found it useful and are now feeling better equipped to lead by example, armed with the resources and tools to take meaningful action. If you could share your feedback with us just after you leave this page, that would be fantastic, as it helps us continue to improve our webinars and the content we provide with you. The next webinar will be about using social media to raise awareness and increase donations on the 30th of March in 2 weeks' time from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. And we hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Chiara.